If you ever wondered why some photos are brighter or darker than others, why there are shallow or bokeh kind of effect in some pictures, then you're in the right place. Today we're diving into one of the fundamental concepts of photography, which is exposure. Exposure is the amount of light that hits your camera sensor when you take a photo. Think of it like opening and closing the curtains of a room. Too much light and your photo might be too bright, too little light and it might be too dark. But how do you control your exposure? Well, you control it using the exposure triangle, which is a set of 3 parameters that you can act on to change your exposure. The exposure triangle is composed of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And by controlling those 3 parameters, you will be able to create any pictures that you want. First up, let's explore aperture. Aperture is basically the size of the opening in your lens. And the aperture can be controlled on your lens or in your camera based on the camera system that you use. For example, on this camera, you can control the aperture right here on the lens directly, but on this camera you will have to control it through the menu system. And how is it measured? It's measured in f numbers. Typically it can go between f1 or even lower sometimes to f22. Now something else that is important to understand and that can be confusing sometimes is that the higher the f number, meaning f16 or f22, the smaller the hole to let the light enter your lens will be. The smaller the f number, the bigger the hole, the opening, the aperture of your lens will be. But how does it affect your image exactly? Well, typically with a higher f number, you will have more in focus in your image. Which is why for photography styles like landscape, people will tend to use higher f number like f8, f16 or f22 sometimes. However, if you want a very shallow depth of field, meaning that you want to have your subject in focus but the background very blurred, then you will use a lower f number, meaning a higher aperture. Now let's move on to shutter speed, which is basically the duration your camera's sensor is exposed to light. Think of it as a curtain that opens and closed in a fraction of a second. Fast shutter speed like 1/1000 or 2000 of a second freezes action and are perfect to capture moving subjects crisply. However, they limit the amount of light entering your camera. Slow shutter speed like 1/30th or 1/15 allow more light to reach your sensor and create a sense of motion through intentional blur. Also, you have to be cautious to the fact that if you want to use slow shutter speed without a tripod, then it will definitely result in overall blurriness in your image. Because let's face it, we are not completely still when we take pictures. We move slightly. And if your shutter speed is too slow, then that little micro movement will induce blur into your picture. So remember, shutter speed is basically how fast the curtain on your sensor will close to capture the picture. Moving on to ISO, which refers to your camera's gain after receiving the light onto the sensor. Lower ISO values like 100 maintain image sharpness but require more light for balanced exposure. Increasing the ISO to values such as 1600 or 3200 brightens your image in low light situations, but it comes at a cost: the introduction of noise or grain. Think of noise as the grainy texture that can degrade the quality of the image. So optimizing your ISO is crucial to achieving the right exposure without sacrificing image quality. As a rule of thumb, you will always want to minimize your ISO if you're able to act on other parameters of the exposure triangle to get the best possible result for your image. Okay, so how do they interact with each other, those 3 parameters? Let's say you're shooting in low light. You could open your aperture to let in more light, but that might introduce a shallow depth of field. Are you okay with that? To counter this, you might slow down your shutter speed to capture enough light, but now you risk introducing camera shake without a tripod or motion blur your subject. Are you okay with that? And if you increase the ISO, you can brighten the image further, but too much of it might lead to unwanted noise. Are you okay with that? It is all about balancing those three parameters to make sure that you get the best possible result and the result that you want. So whenever you want to take a picture, ask yourself simple questions. Are you okay with motion blur? Do you want to have a sharp and crisp motion capture? Do you want a shallow or a deep depth of field? Based on those questions that you ask yourself, you will be able to set your aperture and shutter speed. Then, based on those parameters, you can then adjust your ISO to make sure that you get the correct exposure for your photography. If you found this tutorial helpful, then don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Pro News. Thank you for watching today's video, and if you've missed it, check out this video right here where we talk about the Sony a6700. See you there.